This is Adam Katseff, and I am a photographer and have always admired Robert Adams and one of my first main influences. So it's fun to be here looking at this book and at this time.
So let's open it up.
The first picture in the book. Oh yeah, that is just a miraculous picture. Yeah, that is one of my favorites of his, actually, and such a wonderful lead-in to the book.
To me, it looks like it's mapping out 2-point perspective. It almost feels, I mean, you say miraculous. I think that's a perfect word for it. It feels like it's impossible that you could see lines diverging like this.
To me, I think I can remember being pretty perplexed by it the first time seeing it, and I still feel this way looking at it now. It almost looks like it's a double exposure, like the ground has been exposed 2 times with, like, exactly like you're saying, different perspectives and sort of overlapping in this way. And clearly it's not that, it's a single frame, single picture. But I mean, what a wonderful way to sort of capture the expansiveness and the ability to go any direction within a landscape. That is something that to me really defines the Prairie and that type of landscape.
And then I'm taken by the next spread of the church at two different moments in 2 different seasons.
Mm-hmm.
So whereas it felt like a pretty straightforward narrative, a chronological experience moving into town, suddenly we've got 2 extremes of the seasons. We have bare trees on the left and leafy trees on the right. So what does this do for you and your sense of movement or time?
I've always loved miniseries like this of the same thing over time. And Fraenkel, for instance, made pictures in similar landscapes in Texas of a few 10 minutes apart, or going back after a tornado ripped through a town. And so I'm right off the bat, I'm a huge fan of multiples of the same thing in a way. The sky is the most noticeable difference, at least to me, right off the bat. But then you start seeing that, that it's clearly a very different season and a lot of time has passed between these two. And for me, that speaks as much to the church and the landscape as it does, maybe even more about the photographer, about Robert Adams' presence in this place, that he wasn't just passing through. This was a place that either he stayed for a while or he visited multiple times. For me as a viewer, I like that sort of autobiography in a way of how the series was made.
Yeah, great. And even without including dates or titles on the pictures or on the pages themselves, we have to flip to the back to realize that the pictures were made over at least a 10-year period. But here, just with leafiness on the trees, we get that sense of time and commitment. These are probably my favorite images ever. I have so many questions.
I'd love to hear what those questions are.
Well, it's about time again. Was it just, shot 1 and shot 2? Like, I'm reading it left to right, as in the cow stood up, but it always forces me to think about how a photographer puts a sequence of images together. It's not necessarily in the order they were made, nor is it even at the same time. I mean, lots of cows look alike. It might not even be the same cow.
It's true. Yeah, there are moments where you think that, I think at first glance, it feels like only a second, went by, or, he pulled up or walked up, the cow was sitting, then the cow stood up, he made a picture in both instances. But the more you look at it, the more actually that kind of breaks down, the movement of the other cows in the background. We can see that the clouds have shifted, and actually quite a bit. And I believe the foreground is different. So it's not like he was, I could be wrong, but from this perspective, it seems that the grass itself is shifted. It's not the same foreground. Am I right?
Right. It looks like that to me too. Maybe he's gotten closer to the cow. But yeah, part of what I love about this is that it teaches you just how much more there is to see if you take a little bit of time. And that if you have the opportunity to compare, you recognize that all of these things are choices.
Yeah, I think so much of his work in general is about humankind's participation, if you will. That's a kind word, I think, but participation in the landscape and effect on the landscape. And it's nice to see these moments where it's almost about his participation in the landscape. I love these images, and I've seen them in person, and seeing them here. I have to say, I think my favorite pictures by Robert Adams, I think almost across the board, and this surprises me as sort of a landscape photographer myself, but I absolutely love his interiors. His way of moving through a space and composing things. And, it's funny. I think most photographers going into spaces like this, the easier task or the easier tool to use would be a very wide angle lens, capturing a big space. And he's not doing that. I mean, these are pretty normal focal length lenses, and which oftentimes can lead to a pretty claustrophobic picture indoors. He just finds a way, like a puzzle, almost to make it all fit together and pull you through space. And I think these are both really wonderful examples of that. This is again another sort of miraculous composition and use of interior space compositionally. Just that chair coming out of the right side of the frame and things being sort of cut off and a little too close or a little claustrophobic, but everything just feeling right. Like it just feels, I don't know, his interior pictures, and obviously the one on the left there with figures, his interiors feel so different than most interior pictures to me. And I think it's that it feels like we're there versus we're looking at a place, we're experiencing it. Like at least I always feel like I know where I'm standing in the room, or I feel that I do. And that gives them a very warm feeling. It never feels like we're intruding, that we're breaking into someone's house and spying on their furniture and their things. It's very different. It feels very, even when there are no people present, it feels like he was invited with open arms into the place. And yeah, I love that about the images. That's really one of the huge differences, I think, between this landscape and this type of town versus the East Coast developments where, here, there's very clearly, when you have left town. You're in town, you're out of town, you've got X number of minutes or miles to get to the next town. And I think that's part of that desolation and also comfort.
Now we really are leaving town.
Yeah. Got to say goodbye to the church. And yeah, gosh, I love that. I love the image of the road. And I like that it's not the last picture. It's just about the last, but yeah, that's a great image. I think really does capture the feeling of being there. There's a lot of sky.
Well, thank you so much for looking through Robert Adams's Prairie with me.
Oh, thank you. It was a nice opportunity to do that.